March 6, 1944. Above Berlin. The Luftwaffe pilot tilted his Messerschmitt into a shallow turn, scanning cloud cover above the city for movement in the bomber stream. It was too quiet. By now, the bombers should have fixed into formation. They always came with discipline. Heavy, blunt, vulnerable when spotted. He adjusted his trim, engine humming clean as he signaled his squadron to fan wide. Berlin lay below like a frozen heart, choking on smoke and silence. This was home airspace. Safe, or so they had been told. Then he saw it, a ripple in the sky, contrails, thin blades arcing down like silver cuts across the canvas, too small for bombers, too fast for shadows, and coming straight at them. "They're here," he whispered into the headset. "Here, over Berlin." Before anyone could reply, the sky tore open. A round clipped his wingman. A clean burst from a diving Mustang. The German fighter spun once before bursting into flame, belly flipped toward the ground. The first pass wasn't the worst. The worst was realizing this was no hit and run. They weren't passing through. They had come to stay. In every Luftwaffe flight school, they taught the limits. Fuel. Distance. Escort planes. The P-51 Mustangs were escort fighters. Never deep-strike hunters. But that lesson just collapsed. The P-51 had flown 850 miles, refueled, reached cruising altitude. And now, it was hunting over Berlin. "They told us they couldn't make it this far," one captured German pilot would say later. They were wrong. Below the smoke trails, panic spread through Luftwaffe comms. Orders scrambled. Pilots turned, not to protect their city, but to save themselves, because in that moment, the war changed. The sky was no longer theirs. The P-51 was here, and it had more fuel. And more bullets. RAF Debden, England. February 1944. The air was cold and tight with clouds, but Captain David "Dutch" Ellison didn't seem to notice. He moved around his P-51 Mustang like a man circling destiny. Gloved hands ran along polished skin. Each rivet felt like a promise. Each panel, a signature of something new. Something meant to break limits. His crew chief, Sergeant Ramsey, tightened a bolt under the flight flap and glanced up with a crooked grin. "This bird's got legs. Cap all the way past Berlin and back, if you treat her nice." Dutch smirked. He wasn't worried about the plane. He was worried about proving everyone else wrong. Underneath the hood, the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine thrummed like it knew what was coming. 2,400 horses bottled behind a seamless cowling, smooth at altitude, brutal in a dive, surgical in a climb. The drop tanks, newly designed to stretch the Mustang's legs to over 1,600 miles, hung beneath the wings, feather-light in design but massive in what they meant. Reach, real reach. Allied High Command called it a breakthrough. The Germans hadn't gotten the memo. Across the channel, in a reinforced Luftwaffe bunker outside Berlin, officers scanned intercepted Allied signals with amusement. British analysts were claiming the Americans had a new long-range escort. One report even suggested U.S. fighters could accompany bombers all the way to Berlin. One colonel barked with laughter. They'd run out of gas halfway over France and drop from the sky like pigeons. Another officer folded the report closed without comment. "They can't reach us, let them try." But back at Debden, Ellison ran his pre-check like it was second nature. Flaps down. Nose up, he climbed in, adjusted gauges. Looked down at the tail number. 472, me and my shadow. Not a title. A warning. This wasn't just a plane. This was America's answer. To flak. To fighters. To being told what they couldn't do. They'd lost too many bombers over Stuttgart, Schweinfurt, and Hamburg. This time, the Mustangs wouldn't be flying back home lacking range. They'd be flying ahead, waiting with tanks, fire, and altitude, over Berlin. Ellison pulled the throttle. The plane rolled, wheels up, nose high, sky wide open. He didn't just believe in this plane. He believed he'd make it back and that someone else wouldn't, because while the Luftwaffe dismissed the data on paper, the P-51 Mustang wasn't flying on paperwork. It was flying on fuel, fury, and the certainty that Germany just ran out of sky. Berlin. Morning briefing. March 6, 1944. The Luftwaffe war room buzzed with purpose. Hands tapped maps. Radios whispered movement. Generals leaned over glass-topped tables dusted with cigarette ash and confidence. The Allies were coming again. Another bomber raid. Likely another attempt to cripple industry, target rail lines, shake civilian morale. But this time, the Luftwaffe was ready. "Send everything," said General Major von Rechlin. "The bombers will come alone, as they always have." Dozens of fighter squadrons, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf FW-190s, were drawn into position. Above Magdeburg, north of Leipzig, inside Berlin itself. Fuel trucks rolled onto icy tarmacs. Flight crews pulled oxygen masks tight. Colonel Ernst Rehfeldt, commander of Jagdgeschwader 301, paced in front of his men. Veterans all, sharpened by thousands of flying hours. "This is our chance," Rehfeldt said calmly. "This is our sky. Berlin is ours, always has been." He grinned, knowing it stung them to know how close American bombers had gotten in recent weeks. "They never make it here with fighter escort. Not this deep." Fighter Command had run the numbers. Even the feared P-47 Thunderbolts couldn't make it round trip. At best, they'd peel off near the Rhine. But what Rehfeldt didn't know, what no one in the room had been told, was that the Americans hadn't brought Thunderbolts, they'd brought Mustangs, and these weren't ordinary. These were P-51Bs fitted with external drop. Tanks, altitude-friendly. Fuel stretching and fast enough to match. Then, outfly anything Germany had left. At that moment, 20,000 feet over the North Sea, the lead Mustang flight locked into escort formation. Captain David "Dutch" Ellison adjusted his oxygen mask and looked at his wingman. "Keep your eyes up. The Luftwaffe thinks we can't stay up here. They'll look for bombers," his wingman nodded. "They won't be looking for us." Behind them, silver B-17s held course, tight and layered, flak jackets sun-polished, numbers painted from dozens of American states like someone had flown a country into the sky. But above flew a secret. The Luftwaffe wasn't facing a raid. They were walking into a hunter's sky. And they were the prey. Rehfeldt gave the launch order. "Take the intercept. Find the bombers. Get in." "Get out!" aircraft roared down the strip. Camouflage netting flapped as tail fins cleared mud and speed. The radios clicked alive. Command. Channels buzzing with target. Vectors. Squadrons took to the air and swept. East, confident, quick, dead men flying in formation, because what they didn't hear was the chorus of Packard Merlins already climbing in perfect rhythm past contrail altitude. P-51s cruising light on externals, sun behind their backs, eyes on radar, and minds locked for the bounce. At 27,000 feet, a Mustang pilot flashes a coded signal. Contact, below. The Luftwaffe spreads wide, scanning for bombers, but the bombers are bait, and the Mustangs are already diving. They thought they'd found targets. Ellison would write later, but all they'd found was a sky they didn't own anymore. "We know what's about to happen. They don't, and we feel it coming with every tick of altitude." The Luftwaffe reached up that morning thinking they'd deliver pain. What they get instead? Air superiority stolen right out from under them. 25,000 feet over Berlin, March 6, 1944. The bombers had arrived. Slow, heavy, layered in formations of four, bristling with guns, crawling through jet streams like giants blind to the hunters below. Luftwaffe squadrons rose to meet them, angled from all sides, sun at their backs, hungry to complete what they thought would be another day's cleanup. And for the first few moments, it looked easy. Captain Wilhelm Gerstner, a veteran Luftwaffe ace, lined up his shot on a bomber cell above him. He instructed his wing to break left on signal. They'll run blind. The last escorts turned back at the Rhine. His Bf-109 climbed. Locked, but before he could fire, the sky shrieked a whistle. Not flak, not engine rumble. Something faster. It came from above, not ahead. A contrail peeled downward like a razor. Then another. Then 10 more. Focke-Wulf pilots shouted warnings through the comms. Confusion cracked the headset grid. They're above us! Who's engaging from altitude? That's not bomber fire! And then it hit. Not just the realization, but the first rounds. Tracer fire cut clean through the cloud layer, P-51, Mustangs. Dozens. They dropped external tanks mid-descent, silver cylinders falling like blunt thunder behind them, and banked hard into the German flanks. One Mustang sliced across. Gerstner's 9 o'clock wingman, blowing his radiator wide open. Another spiraled through the formation, like it had waited all morning for this moment. They've come all the way, Gerstner whispered into the comms. God help us. The trap didn't close like a door. It collapsed like the roof of the sky. Mustangs dove faster, banked tighter, climbed harder, years ahead in maneuverability, not just speed. The Luftwaffe had more aircraft in the air that morning, but the Allies had better aircraft, and worse intentions. Gerstner pulled a hard split S, trying to break altitude. P-51s followed. They weren't just defending bombers now, they were on the hunt. We turned to strike the bombers, but the sky shrieked behind us. Another Bf-109 tail erupted. Pilot ejected, but caught fire in open air. One FW-190 tried to retreat west. A Mustang paired with him wingtip to wingtip. Stayed there, didn't fire, until just before the haze lifted through 20,000 feet. 1 4-second burst, gone. Down below, aerial gunners from B-17s called it in disbelief. They ain't pulling off. The escorts, they're doing fight cleanup. High above, smoke trails spun downward like signatures. By the time most Luftwaffe formations realized what had happened, 7 minutes had passed. In that window, Bf-109s downed, more damaged, were lost in spins before contact. Entire squadrons scattered. Comms jammed from radio overlaps. P-51s zigzagged over bomber formations like guard dogs tongued with fire, chasing the foxes before they got to the henhouse. Gerstner's voice came weak across the line. Commander, we need orders. This is not as planned. But no orders came. No plan had expected them to fight over Berlin, against Mustangs still flying with control, fuel, and fury. On the ground, anti-aircraft flak began bursting, too late and too confused. The sky no longer held rank. It held chaos. Whose tracer was whose? Whose smoke was friend? It didn't matter. One Mustang squad ran 3 kills in a pass before returning to cover. The rear bomber column. They hadn't lost a man. We didn't escort them, said one American pilot in his debrief. We led them, in and cleaned behind. By the time the last of the Luftwaffe fighters broke contact, the sky over Berlin was just noise and fire. What began as a trap had become a rout. Gerstner limped home on fumes, dash cracked, canopy half fogged. He didn't debrief. His squadron wouldn't reform. When he landed, he sat on the wing of his ruined fighter and stared at the sky still belching smoke. They lied to us about the P-51, he would later tell an interrogator. But the sky told the truth. The break orders came too late. Luftwaffe pilots tried to regroup, to climb again, to re-establish formation, even as tracer fire continued from above and behind. But there was no formation left, and there was no escape. In the chaos that followed the initial ambush, battered German fighters dove for cover, peeling off toward the suburbs of Berlin. They knew these skies. They knew the ground. They knew flak fields and airstrips. What they didn't know was that the P-51s weren't done. They were chasing, all the way in. On the ground, German anti-aircraft batteries spat, silver-black bursts at anything with wings. The Sky no longer recognized friend from foe. Fire was fire. 1 BF-109 called for ground clearance on final approach. Didn't make it. Flak burst from his own side, caught his wing at 400 feet, friendly. Fire had become reflex, but high above that, still climbing, still watching, was Captain Ellison in Me and My Shadow, the same Mustang he'd launched from Debden hours earlier, now covered in soot and half a dozen grease streaks from kill shots that had no time to be photographed. To his right, a German FW-190, limping, twisting, trying to bank toward a rural airfield south of Spandau. Ellison throttled once, dropped flaps, held altitude, then followed. The chase went below 1,000 feet. Then $500 over rooftops, church spires, smoke columns, Berlin itself. The enemy wasn't. Above him, the enemy was trying to outrun the future. Parents below ducked as two fighter planes screamed past at treetop height. One German boy would later write, "We looked up and thought the war was being fought over our school." Ellison's breathing slowed. The Mustang was faster, lighter, smarter. He waited for alignment. Let the Germans see him. Let him try to shake. It was their turf, Ellison said later, and we still outran them. He fired a 2-second burst. The FW-190 burst from belly forward, losing smoke first, then altitude, for good. It cartwheeled into a field and was gone. Ellison didn't cheer, didn't radio his wing. There was no boast left because this wasn't a dogfight. It was the final act of a doctrine that refused to be outflown ever again. Elsewhere, Luftwaffe squadrons scrambled late launch missions to respond, only to be shattered on takeoff. One by one, P-51s began escorting bombers past the airstrips they once feared. "We hit them on the way up," a Mustang pilot recalled. "They had no sky left where they were safe." By now, the invasion wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. Fighter bases outside Berlin watched as Allied escorts flew home, over their heads, untouched. This wasn't return fire. This wasn't air support. This was scorched airspace. And from that day forward, German skies would no longer say Luftwaffe. They would say Mustang territory. March 6, 1944, over Germany. The radio was quiet now. Too quiet. Captain Ray McLeod of the 357th Fighter Group had already lost visual on half his flight. His wingman, Tex, hadn't answered in 10 minutes. Hit outside of Wittenberg, last seen on fire and diving hard. But below McLeod, 6 silver B-17s were pushing through the flak curtain. Still flying, still alive. And right now, they only had him. He tapped the side of his instrument panel. Altimeter steady. Ammunition. 40% remaining. Fuel. Red lit. Engine running hot. He was over Berlin, alone, with Luftwaffe squadrons circling like wolves caught between relief and confusion. "I told the boys in the bombers I'd stay above 'em," he whispered into the oxygen. "Mask." "So I did." McLeod unclipped his drop tanks over the cloud bank, let them tumble, and pulled the stick left, tucking into his lead curve. The sky was static and sunlight. It was also bait. From the 10 o'clock high, 2 Fu-190s came in fast. He saw them a second ahead, just enough time. He rolled hard, accelerated into the turn. One pass, one clean shot. Fire bloomed. The German cartwheeled into nothing. The second one broke low, then circled for another pass. McLeod went vertical, climbed until the Mustang trembled near stall. Then he came back down and brought revenge with him. 2 down. The B-17 crews below radioed. "Escort still with us?" "Yeah, just one. But damn if he ain't mean." Suddenly, reports came in, another squadron of BF-109s coming in fast from the side, 2 flanks worth of teeth, closing the gap fast, 6 against 1. "Run?" someone asked him later. McLeod said, "Run where?" He closed his formation tighter and dived like falling steel. Gunfire ripped across his canopy. One bullet caught his right hand. The shock jiggled the stick, but he didn't let go. He looped around the 109s, bit at one flank, drove through the center. Took another kill mid-roll. Another with a brute force head-on pass so close he flew through the smoke. He caught flak, too. Shrapnel skipped into his canopy glass. Spider-webbed, not shattered. The Mustang was bleeding. So was he, 4 down. By the time more Mustangs finally caught up, they'd find McLeod wounded, limping just above the bomber wing. Still there, still guarding the 6 he'd promised. None of those B-17s were lost. None, by the end of that day. Over 80 Luftwaffe aircraft were confirmed downed. Germany watched one day's kill count exceed even their worst expectations. Something broke, not just in their formations, but in their faith in air superiority. McLeod made it back to England on fumes. His landing gear locked late. His brakes didn't respond. He slid nose down into the edge of the strip and nearly flipped. He didn't care. He tapped the fuselage like he was saying, "Thank you," to a tired horse. And when the crew chief dragged him from the cockpit, hands bleeding, oil spattered, canopy half gone, McLeod asked only one thing. Did the 6 make it? The answer was yes. He smiled, then passed out. The legend of McLeod wasn't written in a ceremony. It wasn't minted into a medal. Not immediately. It was stamped in the memory of every man in those bombers who looked up and saw one P-51 between them and the jaws of a divided, dying Reich. "He held the line above hell," said his tail gunner. "One guy, 6 ships, 30 minutes, and the reason I ever got to hug my kid again." From that battle forward, Luftwaffe planners stopped saying, "They won't follow us that far." Instead, they started asking, "Where won't they follow us?" There was no answer. Because the Mustangs weren't flying with maps anymore. They were flying with men like Ray McLeod, and men like that don't land until the job is done. England. Late afternoon, March 6, 1944, the base was quieter than it should have been. Not because the mission failed, but because no one figured out how to react when it worked that well. The first bombers came in, limping, wings patched with scorched aluminum, soot fuselages cracked like eggshells from flak bursts and fighter passes. But they were intact, more than ever before. Men climbed down from tailguns blinking like they'd just woken up from a dream. Then came the Mustangs. They landed faster, lighter, near empty on ammo. When maintenance crews opened up the nose turrets and checked kill confirmations, mouths fell open. One mechanic leaned on his wrench, eyes wide. 6 Mustangs lost. 83 of theirs. They had to say it again. 83. Back at the Luftwaffe airfield near Wittenberg, silence stretched so heavy no one dared break it. Of the interceptor wings scrambled that morning, nearly half never came back. Those who did came back wrong. One pilot stood beside his grounded Messerschmitt, canopy glass scorched from engine blowback. He looked up at the sky, still streaked with smoke, still rattling from memories that hadn't landed yet, and said, "We didn't lose the battle. We lost the sky." German officers blamed the fuel shortages, the radar gaps, the lack of elite aces due to poor recovery rates. But inside the barracks, among the pilots it was simpler. They flew farther than we thought possible. They stayed longer than we feared. And they left us no room to breathe. A captured pilot, interrogated days later by Allied intel in Belgium, shook his head when asked what happened over Berlin. He unfolded the answer slowly. It was the day we stopped being eagles and started becoming shadows. From that point forward, Luftwaffe Command avoided concentrated air-to-air engagements at high altitude. Even with Hitler's final push on the Eastern Front, air support squadrons were diverted, tighter, more cautious, or they stayed grounded, because every inch they climbed was one more inch they gambled against endless Mustang fire. Marines on the ground in Italy joked, "Might as well wave to the Navy boys in the sky. They're everywhere now." The P-51 wasn't just a plane anymore, it was a message delivered from sea to city, and it could actually reach Berlin and still chase you home. For Germany, that day sent a different message. That doctrine had failed, that fear had banking speed, that all the proud pages of the Luftwaffe war book had just been torn out. Ammo could be replaced, engines rebuilt. But morale hit the ground with every smoking fighter that never called home. "We thought it was another mission," one German bomber crewman would write in his post-war journal. But after that, none of us looked at the sky the same again. It felt American. And they were right, because after the smoke cleared that March morning, the skies over Berlin had new owners. And the Luftwaffe. They learned to fly smaller after that, quieter, lower, faster to retreat, slower to return. Because you can replace planes, but you can't replace wings that no longer trust themselves to fly. History paints the P-51 Mustang in museum light. Polished aluminum, perfect fuselage, stenciled tail numbers, proud plaques. But the truth? The Mustang never retired. Its body may sit behind velvet ropes, but its legacy is still flying Escort in every modern air war. After World War II, every U.S. combat operation that followed, from Korea to Baghdad, carried echoes of what the Mustang proved on a freezing March morning over Berlin. Range, persistence, protection. That is how you own the sky. In Korea, P-51s flew again, same silhouette, new bombs, new battlefield. But the instinct was the same. Escort the fight past its fears. Outlast the opposition. Stay until your name is written in the terrain. And they did. Mustangs covered friendlies, strafed tanks, and escorted bombers deep into territory where maps blurred between mountains and memory. One pilot from the 39th Fighter Interceptor Group said, "It didn't matter that we were flying newer jets. If I needed someone covering my 6, I picked the man flying the Mustang." By the time Vietnam fractured into jungle warfare and napalm clouds, the airframe was too old. But the idea wasn't. Doctrine had changed, but not the blueprint. Every fighter escort design after World War II, every payload manager, every tactical planner, carried 3 silent goals developed over Berlin. Get there, stay there. Outfight anything there. It didn't matter how fast you got to the target. If you couldn't stay and protect the mission, you were just passing through. Modern Air Force. Academies still teach it in first-year doctrine. Classes. Scroll through course manuals and there it is. The Mustang. Principle. Often summed up in one line. You can't stop what sees you and still keeps coming. Think about it. Every U.S. long-range platform today, from F-15s carrying externals over the Gulf to stealth ops flying across hemispheres, exists because the P-51 rewrote the rulebook that said, no fighter can safely fly that far. The Mustang proved them wrong. Painfully, permanently in theoretical war games, the ones tech officers run behind closed doors, analysts still cite the P-51 when evaluating deep escort potential. The first time an enemy stopped trusting their air? Check Berlin. March 6, 1944, Mustang country. Sure, it's no longer armed, but that doesn't mean it's not active. It lives in every decision made at 30,000 feet. In the timing of a scramble request. In the silent confidence of pilots who know someone's watching their tail. Because legacy isn't built from aluminum. It's built from the impact only a few ever survive long enough to understand. The Mustang doesn't exist today because it's pretty. It exists because it delivers time, precision, protection. And that lesson? It went from Berlin to Baghdad, from crosshairs to curriculum, and it's still flying. They told us it couldn't be done. Not that far, not that fast. Not with planes they said were too ambitious. But we didn't just rewrite the flight path. we rewrote the battlefield. This wasn't about metal, or wings, or flight logs. This was about proof. Proof that courage has no ceiling, that leadership doesn't ask permission to go further, that when innovation meets will, history trembles to remember. We didn't just take the skies. We claimed memory. We made the impossible unforgettable. And in doing so, we made sure they'd never forget. We never gave their sky back. Brief ambient pause. Swelling music. Subscribe to War II Diaries. For the untold missions that changed maps, the fearless airmen lost in silence, and the seconds that turned bullets into legacy. This isn't history. This is what fuel smelled like when courage caught fire.